of stuff that we've been exposed to over the years, great, well-meaning projects and some amazing things, but there's been more than a whiff of kind of what I call dinner party sustainability a lot of the time. People building enormous monuments to themselves and maybe with green materials and energy performance requirements. So it's better they do the green monument than a really dirty one. But it's wonderful now to be starting to think about this in the context of actual real needs for people in some of the most testing situations imaginable. And I'd just like to say, thank you to our Ukrainian brothers and sisters who come here as well for this event, and shows solidarity with the unimaginable conditions that they're facing. But I'll just launch into some questions. So this is meant to be about hybrid funding. I'm going to ask a stupid question. I'm good at that. What is hybrid funding? If any of you want to take that, I don't know, Noel or Rolf, want to field that? You can both have a go at it.
Okay, well, I guess it's essentially where public money and private money comes together to deliver, in this case, housing, be it social housing, affordable housing. That's it. Maybe just quickly, kind of a very quick example.
Yeah, there's different types of hybrid finance, right?
Yeah. So in Ireland, there's several different ways which social and affordable housing is delivered. The two most popular ones are turnkey, which effectively means that a local authority or an approved housing body get delivered the keys to the finished product. So to get there, it requires private capital to develop it. So it requires developers to come up, strike a deal with the local council or the approved housing body, and then get a price set. And they have to obviously build. They take a profit margin, which actually is important, a profit, because I think when you have a housing crisis and that, it can be seen as a bad thing. People make money out of it. But I guess to fund something like that as a private kind of funder, you need to know that if costs go up, if there's blips in the road, as there inevitably is, that there is room within the project for those cost increases to be absorbed out of the profit, and that everybody is still incentivized to deliver. So sorry, very slightly off track there, Jeff. But so in the model we have in Ireland, you need private money to get your turnkey solution to deliver it to your local authority or your approved housing body, mainly approved housing bodies in Ireland. When they take the keys, they obviously have to pay for it, and they have a combination of funding as well. In Ireland, the most popular form of when we go for a mortgage, we think of debt. You need a mortgage, and then you need the equity, which is your own money. And similar to that scenario, we have a thing called CAF funding, which is a name, but effectively it's government money, and that's your deposit, your equity piece. That's given by an arm of the government, and then you have debt below it, your mortgage part, and that is paid off over a period of 25 to 35 years, and it is paid down through the income stream on the property. So that can be given, there's a government body set up to provide that senior debt, but it also can be given by banks, by typical senior debt providers. So when the housing body takes the keys, they have, the deposit part is effectively government money, but the debt part can be either private money or a state agency which does those loans. And there again you have kind of, I guess, both types of money in the system. And then to pay for it all, a local council has a waiting list of people that need to be housed, and they will pay a certain amount of rental for them to be housed. So they go to your approved housing
you've done in very financial sector terms. I put it, started with the same way, saying hybrid funding is a mixture of public and private sector funding, where it is for the private sector too expensive to do on its own, and your public sector money can be a subsidy, it can be a grant, it can be just a guarantee, just to offset risks and to offset costs, to make it more interesting. For me, the important is the public-private part, because the private part still has to take ownership, responsibility. Therefore, when you say equity, it's about the person getting the future asset actually being responsible for things to happen in the private sector. To give the example, so I represent the Energy Efficiency Fund in Ukraine, where essentially it works out we provide a subsidy with only 50%, and the homeowner has to fund the rest of the money to do the energy efficient renovation, or as it were, to the restoration, which is now a main product, to cover war damages. They have to cover the rest. And this is where we talked a lot today about collaboration. This is where we have municipalities such as Rivne, I'm sure Artem will talk about it, where if they provide another 20%, then your sector only becomes 30% that the homeowner association needs to provide. Then it becomes very interesting what can be done. For me, that 30% part, we have Ukrainian banks to finance it, is extremely important, because if they get everything for free, well, they don't care. But even if they just have 10% support, they care very much to make sure they don't lose it. So that ownership, that responsibility is very important.
This might be the pair of you again, I'm not sure. I'll throw it out there and see what happens. Can it be compatible, hybrid funding, with setting high green building standards? You know, are there risks? I just worry sometimes about some private finance models potentially not necessarily having the same attention or fidelity to ambition in terms of sustainability.
I phrase it differently. So I really like what Elena showed today. So we've been talking about our climate standards, but people forget at the end of the day, a bank is an intermediary. So whatever it gives out as a loan, it has to recover, because it has to repay its savers, deposit takers. So can we implement standards? Can we first of all prove that, as Lena showed, that actually it is financially worthwhile for them? And then you can put whatever standards in it, what you want. If you can prove the commercial case that is interesting, that makes sense commercially, then you will actually see any mortgage product fly. The chance, of course, the more standards you put up, the higher, and that was the important thing, you had to think was 198,000 versus 105,000 were the numbers. So the higher your standards, probably the more the differential increase between your standard loan and your green building, and then it gets harder to make the commercial case.
Maybe if I can build on this, I do agree with you, and I think it's actually rather the opposite. As you just said, exactly because it's the hybrid model, there's a higher chance that the green elements will be included, because I think that it's really balancing a lot of interests present. The private sector, the banking sector, makes sure that the project is financially viable and bankable, and that the profit is there. The public sector can ensure that the public interests are protected, not only the interests of the immediate future tenant or owner, but also interests of the greater society. So the environment of the house, of the site, of course, the greater environment question, or energy security question. So there are just so many additional benefits, and I think that the public presence in the project increases balance of all these interests.
I'd say, if I could just challenge you, I'd say it depends. Yes, of course, if you get green certification, you can bring down the interest rate that the central bank provides refinancing for green, and you have good taxonomy, it's good. But then the higher the standards, probably the more the public subsidy would still need to be. That's the only, let's say, addition I would make.
One comment I have here, this is me, the broken record, anybody's reading our magazine over the years would know. One of the arguments we've made in the past, and this came originally from Professor Tom Dunn, who's the head of construction and property economics at what is NTU Dublin, is that if you make it a requirement to build to higher standards, it becomes effectively a tax on the land. know they've got a higher construction cost to bear because of higher standards, they basically will be forced, unless they're convinced they're going to get a premium for selling the properties for extra, they will have to bid less for land. You know, so in other words, that's not going to work in every region, obviously, it'll depend on land prices, but it's an important kind of thing to kind of get people thinking about these things. Artem, I'd like to, sorry, do you want to jump in on that?
No, it's time to give Artem.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'm just fascinated, you know, we're looking at this from a kind of an Irish context, you know. How realistic do you think it is to be looking at demanding high green building standards in the post-war reconstruction of Ukraine, given all the pressures you'd be under? You know?
Understand. Hello, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. And as beginning, if you don't mind, I say a few words about city and progress in our city. At this very moment, Rivne is the first city in Ukraine which joined to net zero city family. So we intended to declare such a, I don't know how to say, aim and task to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. It's not very realistic, looks like, at this very moment in Ukraine, but we are trying. And becoming a pioneer in climate progress in Ukraine open for us a lot of benefits, especially for involving investment, businesses, and a lot of people who related with this field. So this project was some kind of fresh air breeze for us, and we're beginning to transform our city. We're beginning to analyze and come to conclusions that we have a lot of problems which we have to solve, but which concerning our topic, it is about renewing existing building and making alternative resources of energy, such as photovoltaic system, such as heating pumps on these existing buildings, and also to renew and rebuild destroyed and damaged buildings. Especially these buildings must be green, use renewables, and be affordable. And speaking about hybrid funding, I want to say that to my mind we have in Ukraine at this very moment three resources of funding, the most resources. It is first local and government funding, of course private investments, and international donors organizations. And in collaboration we will achieve success. For example, we have a good progress with our fund, Energy Efficiency Fund, and they adopt a program, Greenhouse, and this program, it is a state government program, and they fund our residential buildings communities with 70% of materials to provide photovoltaic system and to provide heating pumps in existing buildings. And we adopt a mirror program in our city, Green Deal Rivne, and we provide another part of money, almost all money, and because we want to make a pilot in our city in order to show our inhabitants that renewables are innovation, and they produce energy from air, from sun, and it is the cheapest energy at this very moment. Also, they can get independence, energy independence, because at this very moment in Ukraine, it is necessary to be independent For example, Rivne located near 2 atomic plants, but we had a lot of days when we had blackouts in our city. That's why it forced us to make some decisions. For example, decentralization, energy decentralization, implementing and providing photovoltaic stations, cogeneration stations, because it is very easy to hide it from Russian missiles, for example, yes, and it is also energy efficiency measure because they provide energy and heat in our city, and winter is coming. Yes, and it's very important. And also we are in touch with several international organizations, and we are speaking about building of affordable houses for IDPs internally.
Displaced people.
Yes, displaced people, yes. And it's also very important, and it is co-funding. They provide some part of money, and we provide another part of money and give land. And this will be energy efficient buildings, 3-store buildings, 4-store buildings for 20 units each, and we will rent it to our people, not only for IDP and for another. We have a lot of veterans which also need, and to my mind, this collaboration of different sources, funded sources, will get success in our situation.
I think it's really interesting. You know, in the week where many people here may have heard the news about the inaugural Sterling Prize winning project in the UK, the first ever building to win the UK Prime Architectural Prize, is apparently going to be demolished 29 years after it's finished, right? Which is absolute madness. You look at it from that context, and then you think from a Ukrainian context, for instance, where we have an awful lot of displaced people, and we will have a real urgent need to provide for these people, to provide at present and then post-war as well, to provide housing. The risk, and Eva, maybe this is a question for you, because I know this is something that we covered with one of the first deliverables of Smarter, this project. What are the human consequences if we have a temporary housing drive that doesn't think far ahead enough in terms of sustainability?
Thank you. My experience in the international development sector, and I spent some time in the Western Balkans, but also in Georgia. And I'm actually going to use some knowledge also Sanila taught me during my stay there. I must say that the first thing is if you put yourself into the shoes of an internally displaced person, the first issue is the location of this temporary housing. Quite often, for various reasons, these settlements could be placed on the very edge of the cities, or of course quite often in a very different part of the country. So it might be very difficult for the person to find a new job opportunity, for instance, but also a new sense of community or basic services. So all this is extremely difficult, especially for someone who's in a position of war survival. So as such, this person might be of a need of a special medical attention, also medical attention in terms of the mental health. Of course, the PTSD syndrome is very common. And I think these things also need to be thought about when we are thinking about the structure and architecture. So for instance, the usage of natural materials where possible might improve, for instance, the sleeping patterns of these people is something they, of course, very much need. Inclusion of green spaces or anything which might improve the sense of security could be also very helpful. There's, for instance, one studio of architects in Ukraine focused on modular wooden houses, trying to construct ideas for refugee centers in a way that that the buildings are really, even though they are very simple wooden boxes, the way how they are placed, it's really calming on your senses and creates a feeling of sort of a gated community. And maybe last point on this is also that probably the one thing that these people would like the most is to take this house and actually bring it home to the original house, right, to come back home. And sometimes there's no home to come back to, so it's quite important to think of these temporary solutions as something which quite often is here to stay, not for a year or 5, but maybe even for a decade. There are technical solutions, especially the modular wooden houses, where you can use this house temporarily, but take it literally and move it hundreds of kilometers away and maybe use it as a temporary house while you are building your forever home, or stack these little boxes on the top of each other and create a proper house, forever house. So yeah, the opportunities are endless. So I would say how municipalities can maybe support this process in terms of hybrid funding is definitely the land policy and assurance that also anything which is being built is built with the community in mind. So usage of architecture and funding in the sense which will enhance the sense of community in the place.
Fantastic. And then when it's finished, or it's at its end of life, you unscrew it, and then you've got a clear site essentially. Although I'm minded of a friend of mine who worked for, I think, he had a sales job early in his career for like the Farmers Weekly in the UK, selling classified ads, and he took an ad one day from an irate farmer who claimed that a steel farm building had been stolen. May have gone to Scotland, I think was put in the ad. So
the downside of it.
there is that risk you need to kind of mitigate as well, right? Just to throw things a different direction for a second, maybe for Noel.
Just put it into the pocket.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it shouldn't be too hard to find in this kind of surveillance world that we live in now, to be fair. Just take things a different direction. What would incentivize developers, do you think, to go above and beyond minimum regulatory requirements?
In my experience, it's always the it's the end purchaser, because there is a perception there that increasing standards and sustainability of a building leads to increased costs. So I'm not sure how true that is. I think that the perception that they have is a lot worse than the actual reality. But in an Irish context, you have big institutional funds buying residential buildings, and they actually they want things to go well beyond the regulatory requirements, and the developers have no problem in providing that. And to be fair, you know, it's typically, you know, larger developers get the larger schemes, which is obvious enough, but they do innovate, and that kind of stuff that, you know, it percolates down through the system over time. But the other thing is, I think, if you have, you know, you're talking about mixing government funds in the process here, it is really up to, you know, to get uniformity of standards, because if you have, as we have here, a lot of the social stock, I would say most of it, doesn't go above the minimum regulatory requirements, it will be delivered to that standard, because, you know, there's a perceived cost saving there. But if you're mixing public funds in the mix there, you probably have an opportunity to try and raise the bar. And as one quick aside, with the Irish Green Building Council, in fairness, they're doing work. There's a home performance index that they have, which rewards people for going above and beyond. And they're looking at something at the moment where they can work with smaller, medium-sized developers, where stuff like taxonomy and going beyond regulatory isn't even on their radar at all. And they're working there maybe to kind of incentivize, from a financial point of view, to get finance providers to offer a cheaper rate if they can meet, maybe not the gold standard, but some sort of a standard, so that at least this convergence begins.
Some sort of gateway drug to the heroin of HPI, you know. I think it's fascinating this though. I mean, this context, the broader context in terms of the European Green Deal, the taxonomy, the CSRD, all these kinds of different instruments that are coming in now. How that interfaces with this when you're talking about hybrid funded schemes as well. I mean, you know, suppose you have a scheme where a developer is building a turnkey development, selling it to a local authority or AHB or whatever, an approved housing body, that's here. Do these instruments, like the taxonomy, do they give enough power to the client, for instance, or do they introduce enough pressure to force people to go beyond what I'd call a kind of dirty building, or not? You know?
Well, I think what has worked well in Ireland is that they have changed the way they value properties, because with fluctuating interest rates and all the rest of it, you know, they had different models to value it, and they found that was all kind of nonsense. It wasn't market based. So what they tried to do is like cost plus. So it's like, come in, tell me what your costs are to build this thing, and we will give you a profit margin on top of that. So as a part of that process, you could say incentivize them further and say, if you meet a standard that is beyond the regulatory minimum, we can add, you know, an additional bonus for that into the end price. And you know, it doesn't happen because I understand that, you know, AHBs, approved housing bodies, councils, are under pressure too, because they have government watchdog and bodies going out making sure they're getting value for money. So I think it's probably a wider thing from government level down, where they, you know, try to maybe ask certain bodies to move beyond the regulatory minimum thresholds, and it comes down from there, because they're ultimately providing all these social housing providers with a significant portion of their money.
I have a doozy of a question now that it's probably I think anyway, probably send everyone to sleep, but I think that no one will probably want to take, but I'm going to try anyway. Decarbonising a building and greening a building does not necessarily mean lowering the energy costs, for instance, for the occupant. It should do, depending on the strategy you take. But when you introduce hybrid funding models, and some of them, the models that are enabling projects to be done, district heating schemes, for instance. I speak as somebody who lives in an apartment, rented apartment, which has got a communal heating system, which was put in by the developer, and there's a private company operating it. And we are, because of the way our regulations are written in Ireland, we are tied to that supplier. We cannot switch supplier. So they have us over a barrel. And when the prices went crazy last year, the price per kilowatt of heat we were paying was like, you know, I remember watching everybody complaining and feeling sympathy for people complaining, and then looking at our own price and thinking, you haven't got a clue how high the prices can get. How do we stop that kind of thing happening? And is there a risk with hybrid funding that can be, you know, that could be missed? Probably. Go Rolf, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're confusing issues at the moment.
Probably,
so
yes.
I think what you're referring to is the dilemma of district heating systems. We have the same discussion in Germany, whereby the government is trying to push it because in theory, academically, it's much more energy efficient because it's just one production unit to supply, makes it easier. And the challenge is exactly what's been discussed. You're stuck to a monopoly because the infrastructure cost of putting down the piping is so large that it's impossible to change. That's a very specific, I think, issue related to district heating systems, which will compare out. I mean, your question was more on hybrid funding.
Well, it happens with ESCOs too, to an extent. You know, for energy service companies, if you've got a company coming in and financing a measure in a building, you know, over 10 or 15 years.
Yes, exactly. But I mean, I keep that separate issue from hybrid funding, because it's more of a question of your design of the project, rather than funding, which is more on how do you finance actually the construction.
Yes.
That's why those are two separate issues. I think you can use hybrid funding to, of course, to stimulate certain design that you want to prove. Germany or Ukraine, I'm very happy to hear that Rivne is actually going for individual heating pumps, which we've actually now innovated, and to provide energies, buildings actually to become energy independent, and that's important. So that's the question more of your design of what you're trying to achieve. That's separate. And what we do is that, again, our model is simply to provide a certain amount of subsidy, which others can or cannot. In this case, they want to. Co-subsidize, that makes it very interesting. So I think that's more the issue on the hybrid funding side. What kind of, so our model, we believe our model was so successful because we completely, and that was the discussion this morning, standardized it and simplified it. So we didn't just say, decarbonize. We said, our energy, you want to make it energy efficient, it has to have insulation on walls, that's the key thing. You have to replace doors and window frames and focus on the common areas. That's it, to make it very simple. And only large buildings, no individual. To make it clear, and fourthly, we said there has to be a homeowners association to make it very streamlined and standardized. So we got complaints in Ukraine has 200,000 buildings, but there are only 20%, 40,000 that have a homeowner association. And we got complaints and we're restricting it and said, no, look, 40,000 is still big enough. We can't deal with all of them anyway. We're sending incentive for others to do and to take over responsibility for their own buildings. And so I think that's where, to summarize, come back again. So when it comes to hybrid funding, I think the core is really to come up with simple, clear models, designs that are decentralized, that can be taken up across the country, and your individual case, and that makes it easier, therefore, to implement. In your case, I sympathize. I mean, you're stuck with a company who's just going to screw you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I feel much better now. Thank you. No, that's great, and it sort of answers the next question in a way that I was going to ask. Clear, simple communication obviously is key, so everybody understands what they're getting into, because we're introducing a lot of new concepts for people with this. I don't know if anyone wants to feel this. How do we engender cooperation between municipalities, finance sector, and developers? Anyone want to take that one on?
Maybe just a comment here from the development sector. I guess this is something which is quite often lacking, for instance, in some of the EU funding opportunities, or in general. I guess this is of course, it does cost money and time, and you need to hire a person who is going to go sometimes flat by flat and introduce the project to people, getting them on board. And so Habitat for Humanity actually in many countries do serve as this sort of a facilitator of a project. And thanks to this, then for instance, municipalities are able to come on board as a guarantor, so sometimes it seems like an afterthought or a nice to have in a project, but quite often it can be the core element which actually makes the project possible. So either, of course, a municipality. In an ideal world, of course, we would all like to have a municipal energy efficiency a person, officer, full-time employed only to kind of smooth the path for these kinds of municipal activities. If not, then of course the NGO sector is probably the next facilitator in line.
Fantastic. One thing that occurs to me, and I think this is a really bugbear again, stated efficiency, the targets you're aiming for, and actual results can be very different at times. We're in an industry where we've long suffered some performance gap issues. How much does this matter from a finance perspective? If you have a supposed energy saving and it doesn't turn out to be credible, and I'm just thinking, picking up on a conversation that Rolf and I had beforehand as well. How much of a consideration is the actual potential energy saving, on ability to repay, for instance? Is that even a factor in the finance, or not? Would you say?
Would you take this one? Because I've talked too much.
Yeah, go on. Sorry. Yeah.
I'll just answer it quickly. So again, I come back to the lens example. Our experience is that the energy savings do not cover the entire cost.
No.
They don't. But there's other things which is improved building value and improved comfort level.
Okay.
And then you have other factors which are, if you through higher energy savings get a better mortgage loan, you get additional subsidies which actually buy down the entire investment value. And so that it's not so much, let's say, the individual energy savings, and which in the end we assume an energy rate today, which probably can be actually double in 10 years' time, we just don't know it. So I think it's much more, let's say, these are all considerations which go into the matrix. And then, of course, if you get your municipality to give you another subsidy, if you get a reward for green people, if you get more people willing to pay the rent, then of course there's other larger factors. And for the bank, that's the individual level. The banks, of course, they need to have a certain amount of green finance, certified green finance. That's where the certification schemes come in. So it does matter.
Here, I do have a question for Artem now, actually. I mean, you've already touched on the energy independence aspect and how important this is. It's quite clearly going to be more of a consideration for a country like Ukraine, given what you're going through. What other factors might influence? You know, given Ukraine's relationship with the EU, for instance, is it going to be important in making the case for green building in Ukraine that Ukraine is starting to align its standards and the quality that's built to European targets?
Yes, of course. First of all, we are a European country, and we are going to Europe and to achieve European standards. And of course, when we are speaking about our buildings and developing in Ukraine, we have to change a lot of standards. And we were speaking about insulating and energy saving measures. It is only the first step. And the second step, it is energy efficiency measures. And also there are a lot of problems. And speaking about heating system, we almost in each our city has a centralized heating system. For example, in our city we have 29 boiler houses, and these boiler houses use a lot of gas. And there was a period in Ukraine when a lot of units in multi-story buildings, residential buildings, they separate from centralized system, and they put in their own unit their own boiler, gas boiler. Yes? And at this very moment, gas is very expensive, and buildings are not insulated. That's why they use a lot of gas. And the first step to make decarbonization in our city and in all cities is to insulate our buildings. The second step is to choose what sources will be more comfortable and more energy efficient. Maybe it will be centralized system for some districts, and for some districts it will be, for example, heating pump. And now we are designing some projects with fund, energy efficiency fund, and we are designing a project of heating pump in existing building. And we were accounted and investigated that the tariff with heating pump will be twice more cheaper than with gas. Wow. At this very moment. But to implement this project and to implement heating pump, it will cost a lot of money. For example, 4 million hryvnias. Yes, it is something about 100 euros. So, in order to show to our people, our inhabitants, that this technology is very useful and cheap, we have to implement pilot project and to move all peoples, especially heads of communities, which live in residential buildings to show and to count their money. Everybody in every country, in every city, they count their money. And they want to save their money. It is the best benefit and the best example how to explain to people, to all our cities people, that it is best variant. And also a good benefit that we decarbonize our atmosphere and make a influence on climate situation. It's also very important. And when you put renewable one, it is some kind of drug. You put another photovoltaic system. You put sensors and monitoring system. For example, in our city, now we implemented also a big network of monitors. In each our municipal building, we will put sensors on our counters, and we will monitor in our energy efficiency center all information about all our municipal buildings. And the next step will be to force residential building communities to connect to this system. And we will tell them that if you want to take part in programs, municipal programs, state programs, you have to put these sensors and to monitor how you use resources. And you have to save resources. It is some changes in their mind. And well, when they will change their mind, and it will get a great success, not only for their building, for their society, community, small, also for our city and for our country at all.
Fantastic, yeah. I'm struck again by this this question of what makes what wins hearts and minds in the finance world. I had a conversation many years ago with the token sustainability guy in one of the, at the time there was just a token sustainability guy in in one of the pillar banks in Ireland, and I brought forward a couple of arguments about reduced mortgage default risk, some research from the States on the 32% reduction in mortgage default risk for Energy Star rated homes. And on the other hand, I threw evidence from a couple of studies in Ireland linking the asking price for houses against the energy rating score achieved for the homes. And the response really struck me. Bear in mind, this is a few years after the horrific collapse, the economic collapse that we had. Yeah, exactly. And he said, yeah, the reduced default risk, that's not really interesting to us, but the improved asset value now, in other words, he was thinking about inflating the value of his loan book, I think, to recover. And I just felt, oh my God, have we learned nothing, So is that changing? Are we getting to a situation now where, I mean, you Rolf, mentioned, I know it'd be fascinating from your perspective as a lender, actually. Are you actually concerned, about investing in projects that are as successful as possible and in the here and now for people living in the buildings and how it affects their lives?
Yes, to the extent that, we are funded, just to be clear, from an ESG fund who like the fact that we can invest, about 70% of our loan book or more is in social housing projects. In terms of the end users, so there are certain things that we will invest in, which is high quality homes for the end users. Now, there's a slight economy here as well, is that there are certain things that we probably wouldn't lend towards because you're going to have an inferior end product. But there's a debate there to say in the middle of a housing
crisis, etc. And perhaps an inferior product is better than nothing at all. So I think the answer is yes, but few and far between. I would think, to be honest with you. I think it's more about I don't think we're there yet, to be straight up with you.
Well, thank you for your bluntness. Right, we've probably dragged on, not dragged on. Sorry, it's been fascinating. Sorry. Yeah.
I seem to think of us.
Yeah, no, it's me. It's not you. I promise. Yeah. No, I know. Brian's been pointing at me and throwing numbers in my face, so I have to be wary of that. Look, I'd just like to say in the end, thank you to all of the speakers here. To Artem, I mean, it's extraordinary to think that people in a situation that the Ukrainians are facing could have the presence of mind to be thinking in these terms. If they can do it, none of us have any excuses at all. So we all need to redouble our efforts and stop this being dinner party stories and more integral to everything that we do. Thank you. Thanks to the speakers. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.